Hey, Birkett here, along with Carlos Monarrez, post Super Bowl Sunday here on Freep.com. And Carlos, the NFL season has finally come to a close. Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Tom Brady, former Michigan star, obviously, won another Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll get into that in a minute. But look, the big news locally over the weekend was the Hall of Fame and Kelvin Johnson getting in, first ballot wide receiver, seventh first ballot wide receiver to get in Canton's history. And look, I was in the room, obviously, for that vote. I think we had talked about it before that I had a good feeling that he was getting in. Didn't know for sure, but it seemed to be the direction the momentum was taking us. But I want to know from you, how surprised were you to see Kelvin get in on the first ballot?
Hang on, Dave. I'm a little warm. Let me take off my shirt real quick. Hang on.
Oh,
all right.
Big Stafford fan, are you now?
Yeah. They have a new quarterback. I hear he's pretty good. So, surprised. The whole thing with Kelvin went, as we talked about it. I mean, we wrote about it. I remember talking a few years ago when he was still playing with the Lions, and what his candidacy was like at the time, and the concern was, did he play long enough? Did he have the longevity? One of the barometers has been I think it's 100 touchdown catches and 1,000 receptions or something like that. It was kind of things, but the way the ball's gone, I think, like I've said before, I mean, we're all sentimental saps, and you see somebody play and you feel good about it. So maybe that at the end of the day is kind of a better barometer of looking at just, Chris Carter's stats and saying, well, Chris Carter had a lot of stats, was he really the guy you were scared of? Was he the guy that you had to put the vice on, like Kelvin? So I think as time went on, it really felt like Kelvin is going to get in for sure, but whether he was a first-time ballot guy, that was the question. But I think it was, to me, it was like maybe a 60-40 that he was a first ballot guy. But the other thing, like we talked about earlier, I don't think we were too concerned because it wasn't like there was some other receiver right behind him, like a Larry Fitzgerald next year who would bump him back. Like he would have gotten in next year if he didn't get in this year. So I was like barely surprised he got in. What about you?
No, I mean, look, I gave his case. I mean, I think people know that out there. I'll have an accompanying story on Freak.com here at some point that, I gave the presentation in the room for the voting committee, the selection committee on Kelvin. And I thought, as I looked at his, not just his numbers, but his legacy, what he meant to the game, who else was in the class. I thought he deservedly, got in. I mean, look, in this class, Peyton Manning was a clear-cut number one player, right? No one would argue that. He's the say his name, sit down, he's in. Charles Woodson, I think in most people's estimation, was number two, and I think it was pretty clear. And then, maybe there was a gap between Woodson and Kelvin at number three, but I think the gap between Kelvin and whoever was number four, John Lynch, maybe, I don't know exactly how the numbers shook out, but I think there was a pretty sizable gap there too. Like Kelvin was just, to your point, Carlos, people sometimes put a little too much into the statistics of it. And you look at the numbers and he played fewer games and he had fewer touchdowns and didn't have as many receptions. But really the eye test, what did he mean to the game? What did he mean to this generation of receivers? How did he define that position? What did defenses have to do to stop him? I think when you took all of that into account, I think that's why Kelvin was, a clear-cut Hall of Fame selection in my eyes, and why he ultimately got in on the first ballot and did not have to wait.
So I read somewhere over the weekend that the Peyton Manning discussion was about 13 seconds. How long was the Woodson discussion, and how long was the Kelvin discussion? Approximately.
I don't know if I had. Let's see if I have my notes here somewhere.
While you're looking up the notes, did the crux of your argument for Kelvin come down to, guys, I don't want to do this again? Was that the
people felt bad for me? I was like, come on, you like me, you don't want to have to hear my voice anymore. Tell me right now, put him in. That's essentially what my pitch was. Kelvin was about 39 minutes. Woodson I don't have the Woodson numbers on how long that lasted here in my notes. Um, or do I? Hold on. Charles Woodson was about 17 minutes. Um, so look, I mean, Peyton was the only like slam dunk, right? As good as Woodson was, Peyton was the only. I've used this phrase before, right? Jim Brown and sit down, right? That's the standard that some voters sort of adhere to. Like, if you're a first ballot guy, you can say the name, he's a Hall of Famer just based on that, and that's all you need to say. And that was Peyton Manning, and I think Woodson was, easily the second, guy, but he wasn't that caliber player either, because he had that long stretch sort of at the end of his Oakland career there before he went to Green Bay, where, when he was a free agent, frankly, people didn't want him. You know what I mean? Like there was, that was part of him too. So I think he did have to be discussed. Kelvin, look, again, not really at liberty to say who said what and get into a lot of the details, but, I'll just say this, that most of the discussion about Kelvin wasn't about Kelvin's, his length of his career or how bad the Lions were, or any of that stuff. It was about the first ballot stuff. And to me, that just means like, yeah, he's certainly a Hall of Famer, but do we really want to put him in year one? Like, as every voter, every voter sort of has their own guidelines essentially that they follow when it comes to ranking, the criteria that's most important to them in terms of evaluating a player's, football career, on-field career. And to me, I tend to go by, is that player, first, is he most deserving in this class, right? It doesn't matter to me what receivers did in the past, who else is in the class, how long people have been on the ballot, none of that. I pick the 5 most deserving guys or the 10 most deserving guys, and we cut from 15 to 10. And within that, I sort of define that as, were you the best player at your position for some chunk of time, during your career? And I think the answer for Kelvin is clearly yes. I mean, he led the NFL in receiving yards 2 straight years, but the 3 years when he was an All-Pro, he was clearly the best in the game. And you might have been able to extend that the season or two before, maybe the season after, even, where he was in that discussion. So to me, I think my presentation, I can talk a little bit about that, because that was what was, the Hall of Fame put that out. I talked less about the numbers and more about the impact he had on the game, how he redefined the position, what, he meant to the next generation of receivers, how defenses had to adapt, and he was still able to dominate against what they threw at him. So I think that was a large portion of the argument, and I think other people in that room saw it the same way.
You also made a really, really interesting point, I believe, about who was throwing him passes, right?
I did, absolutely. And, let me all right. So here, I'll show you.
And I know this is part of the Matthew Stafford hate. Here it comes. Here.
So everyone sees it, right? The Lions. Let's give the Lions some credit. This is a book that they put out. They sent to a bunch of the Hall of Fame voters. It's about 20 pages. It's just got a bunch of, stats and numbers and things in there.
All teams do that, right?
Stats, but look, just sort of just so people get an idea of what. I mean, look, everyone talks about Kelvin and the organization having this bad relationship, and we all know where that stands financially. But the PR department, this is relatively standard, procedure for other teams. In fact, I have this here. This is the Pittsburgh Steelers sent something like this out. Okay, so a lot of NFL teams, they'll put together these sort of mailers. Some of them go by email. The Lions even had a microsite for Kelvin, just sort of stating a guy's Hall of Fame case. So to me, I don't need to get into a lot of the numbers, because I know them, I see them ahead of time. But you're right, that's one of the points that I made, Carlos. And you grab my numbers here. All right, Kelvin Johnson's quarterbacks. This is essentially the first half of his career, right? I mean, he played with Matthew in 2009. He was a rookie. In 2010, Stafford barely played. 7, 8, 9. John Kitna, JT O'Sullivan, Dan Orlovsky, Dante Culpepper, Drew Stanton, Drew Henson, Sean Hill. I mean, those were the quarterbacks throwing him the bulk of the passes that he caught the first 4 years of his career. That's half of his career. And so I think that matters when you look at, what Reggie Wayne and Torrey Holt and some of these other receivers that were up for election and will be in Canton one day had by their side, those guys, and you can see, a portion of my presentation on the website, but those guys, Torrey Holt he played with, I got the number here. Torrey Holt played with 6 quarterbacks that made, Pro Bowl appearances during his career, during his 11 seasons. Reggie Wayne played with 11 quarterbacks that made Pro Bowls. That's Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck in 14 seasons. Kelvin, 1. Matthew Stafford as an alternate, right? Reggie Wayne, 10,000-yard receivers, 6,000-yard rushers. Torrey Holt, 8 1,000-yard rushers, 7 1,000-yard receivers. Kelvin had 1 1,000-yard rusher, 1 1,000-yard receiver. So, we talk about, people doing it by themselves, and it's not to say he was surrounded by bad talent, but the defenses could focus on him and only him because of the talent that he had around him at times. And he was still able to produce at this ungodly level. And so, I think that, to me, at least, that made an impact, as when you look at what other people have around you and you say, this is what Kelvin is doing when he has no one else around him. And he's got, this collection of guys throwing to him and no one to take the heat off as a 1,000-yard back. So I think that all fed into his candidacy a little bit.
Well, you said something that I want to kind of circle back on, and then I want to move it forward to how it affects your future. Is
my future,
your future, and the Lions' future is you said, that you made a presentation and you think the best 10 guys you need to, should get in, whatever, that you should vote on the 10 best guys, 5 guys. And, I think that's right. But this is something I've always not liked about the way that the Pro Football Hall of Fame voting goes, is you have to have an advocate. You have to have somebody put up a good defense. And it's not to say that the people don't, or they have their choices, but sometimes, it depends on how compelled you feel, to make that defense. It also sometimes, as there are just human considerations of, I don't want to keep presenting this guy. And I feel like we're torturing this guy by not letting him in, and he's waited long enough, and come on, guys. And everybody kind of gets tired of presenting somebody after a while. And maybe you feel they are deserving, but for whatever reason, other guys come in and they bump them down, or they have to keep waiting. And then it goes to a seniors committee. I don't like that part of it, where you have to have an advocate. And spinning it forward, now that Ndamukong Suh has a Super Bowl ring, he's going to have a lot more serious consideration for the Hall of Fame. I think he gets in. I think he will get in at some point, whether it's the first ballot. Now, as you and I, full disclosure, did not have a great relationship with Ndamukong Suh. It was very, like most writers in Detroit, it was contentious. I'm not going to support your advocacy for him or whatever. They shouldn't even be at that point. I think they need to come up with a better system of, whoever covered them has to present a dispassionate case, like a video, that all Pro Football Hall of Fame, whatever, voters, open it up to more people voting. You can have a presentation, but you don't have to be in a room like, 12 angry men and convincing every single one of them that, this guy gets in and he shouldn't, and I'm tired of presenting him. So, because the Suh thing is going to be, it's going to be hard. It's going to be weird.
I understand what you're saying, but I disagree. Look, I think I agree. Look, first of all, Ndamukong Suh, you're right. He might get into the Hall of Fame one day, and he probably will, just based on the case. I don't have, in fact, I do have the numbers by me. So I'm, this is the benefit.
Did the Bucks already put out, did Bill Keenest already send you the Ndamukong Suh, journal, whatever?
So look, defensive lineman in the Hall of Fame, Ndamukong Suh in Detroit, 5 seasons in Detroit. He was a first-team AP All-Pro selection 3 times. 3 times. You want to know how many All-Pro how many Hall of Fame linemen have more than that? And this isn't even verifying these numbers that are in this book. They're
not a lot.
Yeah, no, there's not. Well, okay, let me say 3 is the minimum. All right, I can't count them up that have more. There's definitely a lot of guys that have more. But like Reggie White had 10, Jack Youngblood 5, John Randall 6. So there's a lot of guys that have more. Bob Lilly had 8, right? But 3 is sort of the standard. Like 3 is the baseline. When you get 3, you start getting into consideration. And when you get a Super Bowl ring, that's a big part of it too. And not only that, you were a starter on a really good defense, that won. So I do think you're right.
Had 1.5 sacks. You led the game in sacks.
I do think you're right that Ndamukong Suh will be in the discussion one day. I don't know. I guess I haven't taken the time to study his career and all those numbers, versus some of these other guys in this book that we have here. This is, again, the behind the scenes, right? I get this book from the Hall of Fame every year on the finalists, and it lays out some of the numbers, sacks and All-Pro nominations and championships and all that. So sort of a statistical comparison. I do know from covering Ndamukong Suh, when he was in Detroit, he was a dominant player. I mean, there's no question about that. His 5 years in Detroit, he was dominant. I'm going to have to talk to a few more people about the years in Miami and with the Rams and, here in Tampa, obviously, just to see how they felt, opponents, coaches, that sort of thing. But when he was in Detroit, I can speak for that time that he was a dominant player. And to your point, Carlos, about the presentations, look, there's no doubt that the human element plays into it sometimes, right? I do think that people, this guy's waited long enough. We got to get him in. Maybe they're sick of hearing about him. Maybe they feel bad for him. They know him. He's a good guy, whatever the case is. Some of that can play in. But by and large, when you get into that room and you're one of the final 15 finalists, you're a Hall of Fame caliber player. And history shows that you're going to get into Canton eventually. And so maybe there are more, first ballot guys or whatever. There's more deserving guys, however you want to, define that. But I think by and large, the arguments, the presentations, you said dispassionate. Like, these aren't people that are like crying about how great a player he was and you got to put this guy in and, oh, he meant so much to me. I mean, a lot of it is statistical based, and a lot of it, as I said with Kelvin, you sort of go beyond the statistics and what he meant. And so, I like the way that we do it in football versus the way baseball does it, where it's just, mindlessly filling out a ballot and ranking your players. There's a lot of discussion that goes into it. I think that, that helps. Certainly we talk to people on our own, about these candidates to get their impressions, and we have our own views from having covered them and watched them. But I think that discussion goes a long way to learning more about somebody and, right or wrong, I guess, to convincing, people on how to stack some of the finalists. So I like the fact that we have that, as long as those days are. And you're right. It's going to be interesting to see how a Suh, and I was thinking about it. I mean, Stafford, who knows if he ever gets in the discussion. He needs to win something first, right? We're not going to rehash that debate. But Dwight Freeney, Haloti Ngata, there's some other guys that played briefly for Detroit here in the last, 5 or 6 years that will be in, that discussion in the not too distant future.
Yeah, it's only, Suh.
And they weren't, significant pieces of what was going on in Detroit like a Kelvin was.
Right.
So I won't be making the presentation, but certainly when they play in an era, not especially because he was here for a couple of years, even though he was hurt, I'll say, a minute of what he did in his time in Detroit. That will be part of the presentation. Baltimore will handle that. I'm sure I would handle the Suh thing if and when Suh is in there. Whereas, Armando Salguera in Miami, he probably speaks second on Suh because he covered him for a couple of years in Miami there.
Yeah, I like that people can, discuss things and add context maybe to somebody's career.
Yep.
I still think you could do that with still having an open ballot and still having some contextual opportunity to listen. Maybe there's a good hybrid blend down the road or something. I just don't like the kind of lawyery part of this, of the advocacy, and and to be fair, listen, you
my closing argument, Your Honor.
Well, you and I have covered sports in a long time, and I certainly know a lot of I'll give you an example of something, like a famous example that I heard about. I was not part of this, but I heard about it, and I think people in LA knew about this. Is Rod Carew, when he was with the Angels. He was hard to deal with. He was a jerk to the writers. And later down the road, something happened where one of his daughters needed some kind of a blood transfusion or something. And he actively asked the writers, he'd been retired, to ask help for them, from them, to publicize that she needed it was a kidney transplant. It was some kind of big surgical thing. And some people had a problem with that. They were like, you were a jerk to us, and now you're asking for our help, And that was a very difficult situation for a lot of the writers. Some people were like, how can you be this inhuman, right? This is his poor daughter and this and that. But sometimes that comes down to it. I will say this for all the viewers here, Dave is a very, forgiving person. He works with me all the time. So that tells you a lot. But some people are not as generous. Some people would say Sue was a jerk to me, Sue was a whatever, and not that they would actively campaign against him, but they wouldn't give him the benefit of the doubt. He was a dirty player, and he may not have gotten 2 sacks in that one game if he didn't step on Evan Dietrich Smith, or, I mean, that kind of stuff, right? Or even worse than that, when someone's up is, like Ndamukong Suh, he had 62 sacks, good player. All right, I'm done. Anybody want to talk? Like it could be very, milk toasty. So that's what I don't like about it. It's too much of the human element, I think, works into the process.
It's a valid point. And, I've certainly have thought about that myself. I mean, not me, but, you see a case like Terrell Owens, who takes 3 ballots to get in. That was a guy that I thought deserved to go in right away. And didn't get in. And I don't know if that was so much for how he treated reporters or just, the general.
Oh, absolutely. He was a jerk.
Well, but I mean,
reporters, he was a jerk to teammates.
Yes. I think that's what people, that's what held him back more than how he treated reporters. Cause I don't know. I never had any dealings with him, but I thought he deserved to go in on the first ballot. And I would have voted. For people who don't know how the Hall of Fame vote works, 15 players, right? You vote your top 10 out of that. So all 48 voters vote a top 10, and then the top 10, finalists come back, and then everyone picks a top 5. So it's not like you just pick 5 of the 15, right? So essentially then you're voting yes or no on the final 5. Going into those processes, T.O. would have been in my top 5 every single time. And was he in the top 10? I don't remember. If he was, I would have voted for him in the top 5 because I thought T.O. deserved to be in. So, but I do wonder in the back of my head if maybe that's what kept him out. It probably was. But listen, I think people out there hopefully know me a little bit by now, but even through this thing, that like, first of all, I love covering Sue. He was good for business, and yeah, he wasn't always like the best guy to deal with. But let's be honest, he did. Carlos, you told this story before about, sitting down with him at some point when, he realized that maybe things weren't going great for him in Detroit, and he reached out to the media. And I did sit down with him after he left Detroit. And, every time I've had dealings with him since, Super Bowls or whatever, he's always been pleasant to deal with. And he was a really good player. And beyond that, I don't think you can take this business personal at all. Like, think about it with GMs and coaches, right? We have to be critical of them at times. And when I see them after the fact or outside of the football realm, like, and they can be angry at me for things that I write, but you still got to go up and say hi and shake their hand and how are you and how's the family? And so I think you very much in this business have to be able to separate business from personal. And whatever criticism I've had about players or coaches in the past, whatever criticism they may have had about me in the past, I think it's all fair. It's all part of this job. But outside of football, I at least like to think that I'm able to separate some of that and judge a player by his merits on the field, judge a person by their merits away from the locker room, whatever it is. And so, and I'd like to think that even though I know the human element does come into it, I'd like to think most people in that Hall of Fame room on the selection committee are the same. And so when it comes time for, me to give Ndamukong Suh's, presentation or whoever to talk about, someone else, I'd like to think that we would all give them the fairest shake if you believe in them as a Hall of Fame candidate, and you can speak to what they meant to the organization that you covered, what they did during their time there. I think that's all that you can really do in that room. And I think that's all that most people do.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I hope that's true. I hope that's, I think so. I mean, you can easily look up the people who are on the Hall of Fame selectors committee, and they're all veteran journalists. They've all covered the league a long time. So, I think there's probably fewer people who would ever take it against or hold it against somebody for, not being helpful. And I think the days of kind of like the Ryan Leafs out there spitting on people and that's kind of gone away. I think people have been a little smarter.
Shoot, we might not get in the locker room ever again. Who knows? So
yeah, I mean, personally for me, I mean, like I can see where like people, I mean, when Sue sat down with you, it was after his time in Detroit was over, and he was trying to put a little sheen on the career, like, remember me well, Dave Birkett, speak well of me when, in the future. And And I'm pretty sure when his time is coming in 5 years after he's retired, he's probably going to reach out to you again and have another a really short steak dinner. Well done. And so I think that's coming in your future. And that's kind of the thing where, like, how self-serving is this? And you are the kind of generous person who is accepting, and you take it all with a grain of salt and understand, that he's going to be advocating for himself. So.
But aren't they all, right? Don't they all, like, at the end of the day, everybody wants good for themselves. So yeah, I think you understand that. But
yeah, but the difference is someone like Kelvin was not a jerk to us. He was a good dude the whole time. And and even after, when he was close to retiring, and he held these different camps or whatever, he'd sit and talk to us, and he wasn't a jerk to us. And Sue was a jerk. I mean, he could be a jerk to us. He could bark at us and whatever. That's the difference to me. If you're
his personality, that he would get cranky with people a little bit. Whatever. I just never. I mean, Sue kind of, that is who he is. Was who he was, right? That he just didn't like to deal with the media a lot of times, and there was a lot going on outside of football, and certainly some of those clouds hanging over his head. I think that impacted the way that he viewed us in the job. But like I said, I enjoyed covering Sue, and Carlos, I'm with you. I think that winning that Super Bowl yesterday, he's going to be a guy that he's going to get in that room at some point. Like, I don't know if it's going to be year one or what, or maybe he's got to play a little bit more. I don't know what all the numbers are, but and Ndamukong Suh will have a case to be made at some point.
And he's one of those guys, as a defensive tackle, it's just not all about numbers. He's got to have somebody provide context, and it's going to be someone like you. Listen, half the time he only played with whoever was helping him on the end, maybe Cliff Averill or whatever it was. Didn't have that many amazing players around him. Who was his defensive tackle, Nick Farrell? You're going to have to say he did a lot of these things by himself. You're going to have to imbue that argument with context, and that's where you better. That Dave Birkett, is a very nice, fair person to you.
Lions fans know he was a bad man on the field, man. Those 5 years, he was as good a defensive lineman, interior defensive lineman, as there was in the NFL. I mean, he was a really good player, and I say that, meaning that he would, when I call him a bad man, like he was that's a good thing, right? Like on the field, like he was a tough dude to deal with on the field, and he caused a lot of havoc for players. And that doesn't mean I buy his foot was frozen or, any of that stuff, right? When he stepped on Aaron Rodgers, and I don't buy any of that, but he was a good player. And so, again, I think you look at that in the context of all that he did. And that's why I say his case is going to be one that's going to be talked about at one of these meetings at some point down the road.
And you know what? Here's one thing that's interesting with Sue is, I don't know how much this will come up, but like, let's just say like a John McClain or someone who's covered the Houston or whatever for a long time, right? Is what if he's buddies with Matt Schaub and Sue kicking Schaub in the Schaubs, like that kind of stuff, or the Green Bay guy or whatever, like stepping on different people and all this kind of stuff, like if you're kind of friends with this person, like Aaron Rodgers,
he's in the Hall of Fame already, man. There's some nasty players in the Hall of Fame too. Like that's part of the game,
But different era though. There are he's by far the dirtiest player in the last 10, 15 years, probably, right? I mean, the old Raiders and stuff like that. That's a bygone era.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. He racked up a lot of fines and got into a little bit of trouble, with the league and whatnot. But that was, I mean, again, part of your point of context, right? Like the Lions needed some of that, and they wanted some of that, because you think about when Jim Schwartz came in, like that was one thing that they needed to change the look and feel of the team. And they just weren't a tough team, and they weren't a team that anyone feared. And defensively, they certainly weren't. And Sue brought that to that defense. So, to your point, having context to that, and I don't think he's gotten much trouble since he left Detroit. So, it'll be interesting. Maybe when I do sit down and talk with him after the season, how much he had to embrace that personality, just based on where he was and whatnot, cultivate that image for everything that became of it. In fact, I think someone asked him, if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember his answer, but I think someone asked him, about that. and just his reputation at one of the Super Bowl, media sessions this year. And he just kind of laughed, and, he said he's still, he's still I don't remember what he said, so I don't want to put that out there. But if that video is out there, go look it up somewhere, because somebody did ask him about that this year and how the reputation has changed over the years and who he is now. So something definitely to watch here. But so we're talking about the Super Bowl and Sue and everything. So let's discuss the Super Bowl, right? Calvin's in the Hall of Fame. Sue, he'll be talked about one day. Really good Hall of Fame class: Peyton Manning, Charles Woodson. I mean, those are a couple phenomenal players in that class. Tom Brady will be there one day, right? He's a Jim Brown and sit down guy. Patrick Mahomes is too, even though I know, Carlos, I know you're going to give me grief because of what I said last week, that he's the heir apparent and he's Brady Jr. And
what did you call him?
What did I call him? I don't know.
Generational player.
Yeah, he's a generational player. And I don't think, regardless of what happened yesterday, and I know that offense didn't look good and they didn't score a touchdown, that doesn't change the fact at all that Patrick Mahomes is a generational talent at quarterback. He's a future Hall of Famer. I feel comfortable saying that after 4 years. He is the heir apparent to Tom Brady, and he will be winning himself a couple more Super Bowls down the road.
You're telling me that you're guaranteeing me that he's going to be a better player and a more successful, like win more championships, like Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson. You can guarantee that.
Well, I mean, sorry, my stuff on my desk was falling over here after I pulled out that Hall of Fame book. I mean, I can't guarantee it, but regardless, do you watch what Patrick Mahomes can do on the field? Like there was a play yesterday, the one, or a picture that got to find this meme on the internet somewhere. That one play where Patrick Mahomes, he's falling down. It's, 4th and goal or 4th, and he's throwing from the 30-yard line, and he's like parallel to the ground, like this far off the ground. And he's slinging this pass, and it hit his receiver in the helmet, and he dropped it and everything. He looked like, I don't know, the guys from Dodgeball, right? The movie, like throwing, like flying through the air sideways, whatever. Like it was one of those things where, like, he's the only quarterback that makes that throw and puts it on the money. And his team had a couple big drops yesterday, and he was under pressure the entire day because they were playing 2 backup offensive tackles. So Patrick Mahomes did not have a great day yesterday. And 20 years from now, when you and I are debating, or our kids are debating because they replace us, and they're debating who's the greatest quarterback of all time, ultimately they'll probably say, you know what, Brady beat Patrick Mahomes head to head. But Patrick Mahomes is a phenomenal player who can do things that no other quarterback in the NFL can do. And I feel 100% comfortable saying that Patrick Mahomes will be a Hall of Fame player one day. And he's the only player currently in the NFL who has a chance to match Brady's GOATness.
I will say that this will probably get me in trouble, but Mahomes reminds me of Michael Vick. The dynamic ability that he has to make plays, to extend plays, and also pretty good arm strength. I don't know if it was quite as accurate on deeper throws. I don't remember that much. The only thing Vic couldn't do was slide. Couldn't slide to save his life, but he was amazing for his first few years, and obviously time caught up with him. Enough hits. I mean, Mahomes took a beating last night. A beating, even if he wasn't sacked, he got hit quite a bit, brought down and stuff. That one sack by Sue, whatever it was, the half sack. I mean, that looked bad. I thought he was almost concussed, but you can only keep doing that for so long. You can only keep making those throws, laying out, and maybe, Super Bowl, it's the time to do that. But that kind of ability, it requires a young man's, mobility and ability to come back from injury, that you tend to kind of get slowed down a little bit. Usually in the NFL, these scrambling quarterbacks, they don't do it. Look at like Aaron Rodgers, right? He doesn't do it as much as he used to do it either. So I just don't know. I don't know that, not that I've watched that much, obviously Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson haven't been in the playoffs as much as Mahomes has. But those guys have, I think, close to the same talent. Mahomes probably better, a little bit, but
a lot bit.
But you got to do it for about 8 to 10 years before you call somebody a generational talent. I would say.
Generational talent. But I mean, I think your point is right, but not about Mahomes. I mean, running, that mobile element is part of his game. It certainly is. And that's why, I mean, you saw it early in the game yesterday, right? Where he was able to run for a couple first downs. And that's part of what makes Kansas City so dangerous. But he is not Lamar Jackson, right? Lamar Jackson, like, that is a huge part of his game, right? He's more like Vic in that regard. Whereas Mahomes has the huge arm, and he just, the way that he spins the ball and the things that he does are unreal. I mean, he's on the same level a passer as the Tom Brady's and the Drew Breeses and these other guys. And I'm just not talking about arm strength. I'm talking everything that goes into passing the football. And so that's why I feel that you're right, that at some point Mahomes is going to slow down that element of his game, the mobile element of his game, but he's still a good enough quarterback that he will still be able to be successful. And listen, as we saw last night, right? And as we've known for a long time here in Detroit, you can't win Super Bowls by yourself. So the Chiefs have to keep surrounding him with the right talent. And that means Tyreek Hill and whoever they replace him with, and Kelsey and whoever the next tight end is, and a good offensive line and a good defense. So that's why I say I don't know how many Super Bowls he's going to win, but Dan Marino didn't win any Super Bowls, right? Peyton Manning won 2, and Peyton Manning was a great quarterback. He won 2 Super Bowls. Patrick Mahomes, I just think, is will be on that level as a player when all is said and done, regardless of how many Super Bowl rings he has.
That's fair. That's fair. So a quarterback can't do it all, obviously, like Marino, perfect example of that. So probably Stafford for you in a few years. So yeah, that's totally fair. But I'm just saying, is this his 5th year as a starter or 4th?
This was his 3rd year as a starter. That's the thing, right? 17 was when he was drafted, right? And he didn't play. 18, first year starting, MVP. It lost in the AFC Championship game. 19, right, won the Super Bowl. Lamar Jackson was MVP, but he was Super Bowl MVP. 20, could have been MVP. I mean, he was probably top 3. Forget what the voting was. Makes it to a Super Bowl. So, so early in his career, 25 years old, he's got the world in front of him.
Yeah. He's definitely on the path for sure.
Before we wrap this up, I mean, look, obviously it wasn't a great game, so we're not going to talk about that much, but just as you look ahead to next year, I did say Rams. Wow. Since you have Rams, Bucks, Chiefs, let's throw them all out there. Do you have a favorite right now as you sort of, think ahead to 2021 and how this thing, may play out? Without knowing the draft, without knowing free agency, who do you like right now?
Yeah, that's the tough one. Well, I'm sure you read my betting story from last week on how the odds changed and how Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff didn't do much for the Lions, by the way. They're like neck and neck with the worst odds in the NFL for the Super Bowl
right now.
The Rams are up there. They're like tied for like 3rd, as high as like 2nd in some places. But I think the Chiefs, if they can, you're right. It was a matter of health for that offensive line for them. If Patrick Mahomes gets a little more protection, and I don't think the defense played well. I don't remember that the defense had injuries that stood out, but they took some bad penalties. They didn't look I don't know, just very effective, and they were also a little undisciplined with some stupid penalties. So you know what though, Dave, sentimentally, I'm going to write about this as Tom Brady. I used to be a hater. I'll be honest. I hated the whole Patriot thing, just win. It got boring, right?
Yeah.
But now he's 43 and wins. He finally tied Robert Ory for 7 championships. So now he's in that Robert Ory class, and I just love the idea that he should have never even had a career, really. It was kind of a mistake. He's kind of the Kurt Warner on steroids, like it was even better than Kurt Warner. And it kind of just proves how, and even Mahomes, right? 10th pick, right? Just inside the top 10. And meanwhile, the Lions and the Rams are swapping number 1 picks, to try to get rid of each other's guy. So I would love for Brady to win 8. I think that would be really cool. I like Bruce Arians as a coach. And it's nice that and it gives hope to everybody, because they hadn't made the playoffs in how long? And they 12 years or whatever it was. And now they make the playoffs. They get Brady, the right guy. They surround him with the right pieces. They have the right coach. It all works together. But you have to give the Chiefs, although that's hard, right? Making it 3 straight. That's Bills territory. So that'd be tough.
Yeah, you just want Drew Stanton to get a second ring. That's what you want next year with the Bucks.
Yeah.
Look,
the key to everything, by the way.
Absolutely. No, I mean, Brady's a great story. I mean, look, I'm with you. Like, it was sort of like the Marino Elway debate, right? Like my roommate in college, like he was a big Elway guy growing up. I was a Marino guy, so we'd sort of joke about that sometimes, like Brady Manning, right? Like I was probably more a Manning guy than a Brady guy, but you come to respect the greatness and be like, this is just phenomenal what this guy does, and 7 rings. And so, I appreciate watching his greatness. The Chiefs will be in the mix because of Patrick Mahomes, but they won't have Eric Fisher next season. I mean, that Achilles injury in January, you're not coming back from that, in time to play next season. So they do have some work to do on the offensive line. The Buffalo Bills, man, watch out for them. Like that was a really good team this year, and Josh Allen took a huge leap as a player. So I wouldn't rule them out of the AFC race. I think that's a team that certainly could be in the mix next year. And the NFC one, that's the one that's wide open to me, and that we're going to have to see how these quarterback dominoes shake out, because depending on who the quarterback is in San Francisco, I could certainly see the 49ers, a healthy 49ers team, being back in the Super Bowl next year. Next year it's in LA, the Super Bowl. I mean, the Rams, I think they'll be better, and I guess they were NFC divisional team this year. The Packers too, man. Look, if Aaron Rodgers stays there and he gets his wish, and they actually, do something this year and use some of their draft picks on guys that will help them, and maybe spend something in free agency, like that's still the team to beat in the NFC North. And I don't think the NFC North is going to be all that good next year. So if you're looking at a team that might have some home field advantage and might be able to make a run, that's another team to keep an eye on. Got a long way to go until we get to that point. And it'll be interesting to see if Rodgers can keep playing at that high level at his age. He's getting up there near the Brady years. So, but it was honestly, there's some tremendous talent in the NFL right now, some tremendous quarterback talent. And it's fun to watch, from afar, some of these guys just sling it around. And that's really what, we need to see the Lions get here in Detroit is just get one of those guys that you can just know will be your quarterback for 10 years. And then all of a sudden you look up and you're in the mix for contending for Super Bowls. So,
well, that's something else that I'm touching on with this whole, quarterback thing with Brady, and not always knowing what you really need sometimes, and, 7th pick in the draft doesn't mean you're going to get the guy who's going to take you for 7 or 10 or whatever it is. So he said 10 years, and that was the one thing I'll say. I hope that the Lions learn their lesson from Matthew Stafford, is at some point it's better to cut bait and to just say, and to be tough about it and say, listen, we've extended him once. He's in his 7th year. It hasn't happened. We need to keep our eyes open here. We need to look at this thing, in a very calculated fashion, and see if there's look at the Packers, right? They drafted a quarterback in the 1st round. That probably pissed off Aaron Rodgers enough to go win MVP, but they've never been afraid of that. They've never been afraid of drafting a quarterback somewhat high, just in case, because you can't just hope that it keeps working. And especially when you're not winning, that's always the hope, Dave. And you're part of the problem in the NFL, is you're the guy like, I want my Manning. I want my Brady. I want my 20-year great quarterback that's always going to win. Like, that's the hope. But sometimes you don't get that. Sometimes you get, a guy who just is good, but not good enough. And you got to be willing to cut the,
I agree. Because if you don't have one of those guys, you're always looking for them. And so you need
right.
And you can look, the higher the level of the quarterback, right, the more chance you have to win, right? So, but if you I'm with you 100% there, Carlos. And I think more NFL teams are starting to feel that way as the quarterback salaries continue to escalate, that there becomes a point in time where it doesn't make sense to pay them because they are not that Patrick Mahomes. They're not that Aaron Rodgers type quarterback. And so why would I spend all that money? Like, yeah, there's a fear of the unknown out there, but let's roll the dice and see what we can do, because this guy's only going to take us so far. So I got no problem with teams that do that. I think that's a wise way to operate in the NFL. And I think if fan bases are realistic about their teams, that's something that they should realize too. So,
and I hope the Lions show us. I mean, obviously the Stafford thing is a nice start, but it kind of came from him too. But I'd like to see if this regime is going to be less risk averse, willing to trade commodities and say we're building a different way. We're building for the future. We're building, we're not just going after the star guy, whatever. We're gonna, get the right pieces and make it work holistically rather than it's Matthew Stafford and the Lions.
I like that thought. No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to say I like that thought because I'm 100. That's why I say Trey Lance at number 7, right? Roll the dice. I don't know. No, or trade down from number 7 and get another future pick. So that way you got 5 first-round picks in 2022 and 2023. Roll the dice that way. I'm with you 100%, Carlos.
I think Dave, you know what? I mean, as much as I would like to see them pick a quarterback, and I think most people would, it'd be exciting to get like a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields, whoever it is, right? Somebody, or move up and get a new quarterback, and that's exciting. If they don't feel it, and they have enough guys in the room now with the John Dorseys, if they don't feel it, like this is not the guy for us, and we have an extra first rounder coming next year, just wait. Let's just wait. Let's just see. It doesn't have to happen right now. I'm not against that at all.
Well, my first mock draft, probably looking at next week. So we'll see who I give them in that one, whether it's a quarterback, whether it's a defensive player, wide receiver, who knows? They need help all across the board. We'll leave it there because we ran long as always. But interesting discussion because Kelvin gets in. I think he was well deserving. Sue makes the case that he should too one day, and lots to talk about at the end of the season with the Super Bowl wrapping up and the draft coming up and free agency and all that. Go ahead. Last word, Carlos.
Okay. One question. Just right now, gut feeling. Does Sue get in? Not in first ballot, but just does he get in?
Ooh. Honestly, I can't speak to the Miami years enough to say whether.
Come on, gut feeling.
I think he was on that track in Detroit. But I don't know how the Miami years are going to be viewed when you're paid that much money and, you get cut. And so your time there is sort of seen as a disappointment. I don't know how that's going to be perceived, but there's no doubt after 5 years in Detroit, I thought he was on a Hall of Fame track. So
no question, because he was dominant for that time. He's still been a very good player and he got cut, but he tried to find a championship. He tried to join the Rams. He probably could have gotten better money elsewhere, but he wanted to play next to Aaron Donald to get a championship. And when that didn't work out, he went to Tampa and he got a championship. So I like a player looking for a title versus just the Miami thing. I think was kind of a money grab, but after that it was, I want a ring, and he got one, and he was a big part of it.
He knew what he needed for his Hall of Fame resume. Without a doubt, he did. All right, we'll leave it there. Good discussion today. Again, we got a little bit of a lull here. Lions probably will have some moves coming up, just some roster moves here in the next week or two. Salary cap dumps, I guess. Kenny Galladay's contract, something they have to figure out. The coordinators will be announced or introduced, I guess, here probably later this week. We'll get to talk to them. And then free agency and the draft right around the corner. And as always, we will be here to discuss all that. But until then, for Carlos Monarrez, I'm Dave Birkett, Freep.com.